The door opened slowly, not because he was being careful, not because he was trying to be quiet, but because something deep in his chest, some ancient, wordless instinct, told him to slow down. The house was silent in a way that didn't feel like peace. It felt like a held breath, like the kind of quiet that only exists when something is being hidden. He stood in the doorway of his own home, a home he had built, a home he had paid for down to the last tile, and felt, for the first time in years, like a stranger. Then came the movement. Fast, urgent, footsteps from the top of the staircase, rushing down toward him. It was Grace, his housekeeper of 12 years. A woman he had never once seen rattled. A woman who had managed crises in this household with the calm composure of someone twice her age. But tonight, her eyes were wide, her hands were raised, and when she reached him, she leaned close enough that he could hear how hard she was trying to control her own breathing, and she whispered, "Sir, please be quiet." He looked at her face, and in that face, in the panic she was trying desperately to contain, he saw something he had never expected to find in his own home. He saw fear. Not fear of him. Fear for him. And in the 3 seconds it took him to process that whisper, something inside him cracked open, something that could never be closed again. I built an empire worth billions. I employed thousands of people. I owned properties on 3 continents, and sat in rooms where decisions were made that moved markets. But nothing, not a single betrayal in the boardroom, not a single deal that collapsed at the last second, not a single moment of professional humiliation, nothing in 41 years of life prepared me for what I saw when I walked up those stairs and pushed open the door to my own bedroom. His name was Damien Osei, and if you had ever picked up a Forbes Africa magazine in the last decade, you already knew that name. You had seen the cover, the sharp jaw, the calm eyes, the headline that read, "The man who built an empire from nothing." But headlines have a way of flattening people. They take an entire life, all its complexity, all its contradiction, all its private pain, and compress it into something clean and sellable. The real story of Damien Osei was never on that cover. The real story was always somewhere behind closed doors. He was born in Accra, Ghana, the second of 4 children, in a 2-room apartment where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing every night. His father drove a taxi. His mother sold fabric at the local market, up before sunrise 6 days a week, hands never still, back never fully straight. They were not a poor family in the way that destroys people, but they were a family that understood, deeply and without sentiment, that comfort had to be earned. Every single day, without exception, Damien absorbed that lesson like oxygen. By the time he was 12, he was helping his mother track her inventory. By 16, he was negotiating directly with her suppliers. By 22, he had taken a modest loan, launched a small logistics company, and worked 18-hour days for 3 years straight until it turned its first profit. By 30, he had expanded into real estate. By 35, into energy. By 41, his conglomerate employed over 4,000 people across 6 countries, and his net worth had crossed a number that most men only dream about in their most private, most ambitious moments. He was, by every measurable standard the world had given him, a success story. The kind that gets told at university commencement speeches. The kind that young boys in small towns save as a phone wallpaper to remind themselves, on the hard days, that it is possible. And then there was Serena. If Damien was the empire, Serena was the thing that made the empire feel worth having. She was Ghanaian British, born in Kumasi, raised partly in London, polished by education and experience into someone who moved through the world with a rare and effortless grace. She had worked as a fashion editor for nearly a decade, and she carried herself the way only a woman who truly understands beauty can, not consumed by it, not performing it, but simply embodying it in everything she touched. She was warm in a way that surprised people who expected someone of her elegance to be distant. She laughed easily and fully. She remembered names, birthdays, the small details people mentioned in passing that most people forget by the next morning. She was, in every room she entered, the person everyone gravitated toward, not because she demanded attention, but because she made every single person she spoke to feel like the most interesting person alive. Damien met her at a private dinner in London hosted by a mutual business contact. He saw her from across the room, her head tilted back in laughter, completely unaware that she had just quietly rerouted the attention of everyone within 30 feet of her. He told his assistant to cancel his 9 o'clock. He never canceled his 9 o'clock. By the end of that evening, he had her number. By the end of that month, he was flying back to London on weekends. By the end of that year, he had proposed on a rooftop in Paris with a ring his jeweler had spent 3 months designing specifically for her. Their wedding was the event of the year. 300 guests. A ceremony that moved grown men to tears. A reception that lasted until sunrise. In every photograph they were radiant. Not the stiff, performed radiance of two people playing a role for the camera, but something that looked real and warm and like the honest beginning of something built to last. And for a while it was. The first 2 years were everything a marriage is supposed to be. Deep conversations. New discoveries. The particular, irreplaceable joy of learning someone fully and still choosing them every single morning. They built a life together that was beautiful in the way only intentional things are beautiful, and Damien, for the first time in his life, felt like the empire was no longer the most important thing he had ever built. But somewhere around year 3, something shifted. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. They were not hiding. They were not subtle. They were standing in plain sight, waving their arms, practically screaming at him to pay attention. But that is the thing about a man who has spent his entire life laser-focused on building. He gets very good at seeing opportunity and very blind to everything else. And so the signs stood there, patient and waiting, while Damien Osei looked straight through them every single day. It started with the doors. Small thing, barely worth mentioning. Except that in 7 years of marriage, Serena had never once locked the bedroom door in the middle of the afternoon. Their home was not that kind of home. It was open, fluid, warm, doors left ajar, rooms flowing into each other, the easy intimacy of two people who had long stopped performing privacy around one another. But one Tuesday, he came home earlier than expected and found the bedroom door locked. He knocked. A pause, just a half-second too long, and then her voice, slightly higher than usual, "Just changing, give me a second." The door opened. She was dressed. Everything looked perfectly normal. He thought nothing of it, filed it away somewhere beneath the 100 other things demanding his attention, and moved on. Then it happened again the following week. And the week after that. Always a reasonable explanation. Always that half-second pause before the answer. He never once asked why a woman alone in her own bedroom needed to lock the door against her own husband. Then came the phone. Serena had never been precious about her phone. It sat on the kitchen counter, on the dining table, on the bathroom shelf, accessible, unlocked, unremarkable. But slowly, quietly, it migrated. It started going face down when he walked into a room. It started coming to bed with her, tucked under her pillow. She started stepping onto the balcony to take calls, sliding the glass door shut behind her, her voice dropping to something he couldn't quite hear even when he was standing 3 feet away. Once, he walked up behind her while she was typing and she closed the screen so quickly, so reflexively, that she didn't even try to explain it. She just looked at him and smiled and asked what he wanted for dinner. And he answered, because it was easier to answer than to ask the question that was beginning to form somewhere dark and quiet at the back of his mind. The spa visits came next. Now, Serena had always taken care of herself. That was never new. But there is a difference between a woman who has a standing appointment every other Saturday and a woman who is suddenly disappearing for entire afternoons 2, 3 times a week. New places too. Not her regular salon, not the spa they had membership at, but new addresses she mentioned only in passing, new names he didn't recognize. Oh, just this wonderful little place my friend recommended. He nodded. He went back to his emails. He did not ask which friend. He did not ask where. He did not ask why the woman he married, who had spent years building routines and habits he knew by heart, was suddenly full of new places and new recommendations and new reasons to be somewhere other than home. And then there was Zara. Zara appeared in Serena's life the way wildfires appear, suddenly, completely, and with an intensity that should have raised questions. 1 month she didn't exist. The next, her name was everywhere. Zara said the funniest thing today. "Zara and I found this incredible restaurant. I'm going to Zara's tonight, don't wait up." Damien had never heard this name before in his life, and now it was threaded through every week like it had always been there. He asked to meet her once. Casually, naturally, the way a husband asks to meet his wife's friends. Serena smiled and said soon you'd love her. Soon never came. He asked again months later. Another smile. She's quite private. She'll warm up. He let it go. Because what kind of man interrogates his wife about a friendship? What kind of husband demands to inspect the people his wife chooses to spend time with? He was not that man. He was a trusting man. A secure man. A man who had built his entire life on his own judgment, and his judgment told him that he was being reasonable, that he was being mature, that this was what it looked like to respect your partner's independence. His judgment was wrong. The girl nights became weekends. Short ones at first. Zara has a place on the coast. Just a couple of nights, I need a break. He understood. He was rarely home. He knew she needed her own life, her own space, her own air to breathe outside of the marriage. He encouraged it even. Go. You deserve it. Have fun. And she would come back on Sunday evenings, and this was the part that should have told him everything. She would come back lighter. More herself. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for years would be gone, replaced by something loose and easy that he hadn't seen on her face in a long time. He told himself that was a good thing. That rest was good for her. That this was the version of Serena he remembered from the early years, returning to him because she had finally gotten what she needed. He never once considered that what she needed was something he could not give her. The signs were everywhere, and he walked past every single one of them. The Lagos deal was supposed to take 4 days. It took 2. His counterpart had caved on the third term faster than anyone anticipated. Hands were shaken, papers were signed, and by Wednesday evening Damien was already back on his plane, heading home 48 hours ahead of schedule. He remembers feeling good about it, satisfied in the clean, uncomplicated way that a closed deal always satisfied him. He remembers leaning back in his seat somewhere over the Atlantic and thinking, for the first time in weeks, that he was going to surprise Serena. Take her to dinner. Somewhere quiet, somewhere she liked, somewhere without his phone on the table. He had been distant. He knew that. He had been swallowed by the expansion, consumed by the negotiations, absent in all the ways that successful men convince themselves are temporary. But the deal was done now. He was going home. He was going to be present. He was going to be her husband again. He did not call ahead. He wanted it to be a surprise. That decision, that one small, well-meaning decision, was the thing that cracked his entire world in two. The car pulled up to the house, just after 10. He told the driver to take the night off, carried his own bag to the front door, and stood there for a moment in the night air, looking up at the home he had built. The lights inside were dim, warm and low, the kind of lighting Serena always preferred in the evenings. He could hear, faintly, music drifting from somewhere upstairs. Something slow and soft, something with a melody he almost recognized. He remembered thinking she must be in the bath. He remembered thinking he would pour 2 glasses of wine and wait for her to come downstairs. He remembered standing at that front door with 48 hours worth of relief in his chest and feeling, against all the distance of recent months, something close to hope. He put his key in the lock. The door opened. He stepped inside, and the house felt wrong. He could not explain it then, and he struggles to explain it now, but the wrongness hit him before his brain had processed a single piece of evidence. It was animal, primal, the way a man's body knows something his mind is still refusing to accept. The air inside felt occupied in a way that was different from Serena alone. There were 2 glasses on the kitchen counter, both used, both with the faint crescent of red wine at the bottom. A woman's jacket draped over the arm of the sofa. Not Serena's jacket. He had never seen it before. Small things. Explainable things. Except that his body had already stopped accepting explanations. Then came the laughter. Soft. From upstairs. 2 voices, low and warm and completely unaware that anyone had just walked through the front door. And underneath the laughter, the music, still playing, that slow, unhurried melody that now felt like something else entirely. He stood at the bottom of the staircase with his bag still in his hand and his heart doing something he had never felt it do before. Not racing, not pounding, but slowing. Dropping beat by beat into something thick and cold, the way water slows when it is about to freeze. Then the footsteps, fast ones, from the top of the staircase, rushing down toward him, and Grace appeared on the landing, her face catching the dim light, her eyes finding him instantly. And in those eyes, in the face of the woman who had kept this household running with quiet dignity for 12 years, the woman who had never once lost her composure in his presence, he saw something that stripped every remaining explanation from his mind. She was terrified, not startled, not surprised, terrified, the kind of terror that only lives in a person who has been holding a secret they never wanted to hold, who has been watching something build toward this exact moment for longer than they could bear, and who now has to stand between the secret and the man it will destroy. She came down 3 steps, then stopped. She pressed one hand to the wall to steady herself. And she looked at him with something that was equal parts apology and desperation, and she whispered, "Sir, please be quiet." He stared at her. The bag slipped from his hand. He did not hear it land. "Grace." His voice came out lower than he intended. "Step aside." She shook her head, just once, a small, helpless motion that told him she had already lost this fight, and she knew it. Her eyes were filling, her hands were shaking, and he understood in that moment that she had not caused this. She had only been living inside it, seeing what he had been too busy, too trusting, too willfully blind to see, and carrying it alone in the way that women like Grace always carry the unbearable things that happen in the houses of powerful men. He moved past her. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, each step feeling like it belonged to someone else's life. The music got louder as he rose, that same slow, unhurried melody, intimate in a way he could now not unhear. The laughter had stopped. The landing stretched ahead of him, familiar and foreign at once, and at the far end of it, their bedroom door. The door to the room they had chosen together. The room that held 7 years of a marriage, of mornings and midnights, and every private version of themselves they had ever trusted each other with. It was slightly open. A thin line of warm amber light fell across the hallway floor. He placed his hand flat against the door. He pushed it open, and the world ended. Not loudly, not with the dramatic collapse he might have imagined if he had ever allowed himself to imagine something like this. It ended quietly. It ended in the space between one heartbeat and the next. In the half-second it took his eyes to process what they were seeing and deliver the information to the part of him that understood what it meant. Serena was there. In their bed. In the bed he had bought. In the sheets she had chosen. Beneath the ceiling of the room that was supposed to be the most sacred and private geography of their marriage. She was not alone. The woman beside her was Zara. He knew it without having ever seen her face before. He knew it the way you know the ending of a story you have been reading without realizing, the way everything that confused you suddenly becomes unbearably clear. Zara, the name that had lived in his house for months without a face. The name that had appeared at the exact same time the distance between him and his wife became impossible to cross. The name Serena had said with a warmth she had stopped using for him. They saw him at the same moment, and in that moment, in the frozen, electric silence that filled the room like a held breath, he saw 3 things simultaneously that he would spend the rest of his life trying to forget. He saw Serena's face, not guilty, not caught but stricken. The face of a woman who had been dreading this exact moment for longer than he knew, who had rehearsed it 100 times in her mind, and for whom the reality of it was still somehow worse than anything she had prepared for. He saw Zara pulling back, instinctively, creating distance, the body language of someone who knows they're standing inside another person's grief. And he saw, resting on the nightstand, still catching the light, Serena's wedding ring. Not on her finger, on the nightstand, set aside, as if even the symbol of what they were to each other had needed to be removed before this could happen. He did not speak. He could not. 7 years of marriage. Thousands of hours building a life together. Every promise made in the presence of 300 people on the best night of his life. Every morning he had kissed her forehead before she was fully awake. Every time he had told himself the distance between them was temporary, was manageable, was a season they would pass through together and come out stronger on the other side. All of it compressed, in an instant, into something that fit inside a single image. A single unbearable, irreversible image. He took one step back, then another. He turned around. He walked back down the stairs and out of the front door into the night air. And he stood on the steps of his own home, the home he had built, the home he had been so proud of, And for the first time since he was a boy in a two-room apartment in Accra, Damien Osei had absolutely no idea what to do next. He sat in the dark for 40 minutes before she came down. He heard the front door open and close quietly, Zara leaving, slipping out into the night like a secret that had finally been spoken aloud and could no longer live inside these walls. And then Serena appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, wearing a robe, her hair loose, her face completely bare in the way it only ever was in private. No armor, no performance. Just her, just the woman he had married, standing in the dark, looking at the man she had betrayed. She told him, and he sat still and listened, and what he heard broke him open in ways that the image upstairs had not yet managed to reach. She told him she had felt invisible, not unloved. She was careful to make that distinction, because she knew it mattered, and she had always been precise about the things that mattered. Not unloved. Invisible. There is a profound difference between a man who does not love his wife and a man who loves her the way he loves a beautiful, expensive, carefully chosen thing, from a slight distance, with enormous pride, without ever truly seeing her. Damien had loved Serena the way a collector loves a masterpiece. He had placed her at the center of his life the way a man places a trophy at the center of a shelf, elevated, admired, shown off to every room full of important people, and then returned his full attention to the work of acquiring the next great thing. She had waited, month after month, year after year, for him to notice, for him to slow down enough to ask, for him to look at her, truly look at her, and see that she was somewhere behind her own eyes, waiting to be found. He never came looking, and a woman who is not found eventually finds her own way home. Zara had found her, not hunted her, not seduced her in the predatory way his ego initially wanted to frame it, but found her, had looked at her one evening, early in their friendship, with the particular attentiveness of someone who sees what others miss, and had simply asked, "Are you okay?" Not performing okay. Actually okay. And Serena, who had not been asked that question sincerely and longer than she could remember, had burst into tears in a restaurant in front of a woman she had known for 6 weeks. And something had opened. Something that had been sealed shut for years had cracked open in the warmth of being genuinely seen, genuinely asked, genuinely heard. What grew from that crack was not something Serena had planned. It was not something she had gone looking for. It was something that had grown in the dark, in the space that Damien's absence had created, fed by the emotional starvation of a woman who had everything except the one thing she was dying for. And she told him, her voice dropping to almost nothing, her eyes finding his across the dark room, that Zara had given her something she had spent 7 years searching for inside their marriage and never found. Not just physically, emotionally. The physical was only ever the expression of something deeper, the release of a woman who had finally, fully, been seen, who had finally been present in her own body because someone had taken the time to be present with her in it. She said it plainly, without cruelty, without weaponizing it, but plainly because she was done with the comfortable lie. She said that Zara had reached places inside her, emotional places, the deep, quiet places where a person's real self lives, that Damien had walked past for 7 years without ever once pausing to knock. And then she looked at him with red eyes and a steady voice, and she said the sentence that would live inside him for the rest of his life. "You gave me the world, but you never gave me you." He opened his mouth, closed it again, because what do you say to that? What does a man say when the mirror is finally held up close enough that he cannot soften what he sees? He had given her everything that his version of love knew how to give, and his version of love, he was only now understanding, had been learned in a 2-room apartment in Accra from a father who showed devotion through provision and a mother who showed strength through silence. Nobody had ever taught him the other language, the language of presence, of softness, of sitting still long enough inside your own vulnerability to make space for someone else's. He had built a billion-dollar empire on intelligence and discipline and relentless forward motion, and not one brick of it had taught him how to simply be with the woman he loved. She had not left him for a woman. She had left him for the feeling of being alive inside her own life. And the devastating, irreducible truth, the truth that settled over him in that dark room like something permanent, was that he had handed her that emptiness. Slowly, quietly, every time he had come home late without calling. Every time he had answered a work email at the dinner table. Every time he had said, "I love you" from the doorway, already halfway out of it. He had built the distance himself, one distraction at a time. And she had simply, finally, stopped standing alone on the other side of it. Damien Osei was not a bad man. That is perhaps the most important and the most painful thing to understand about this entire story. He was not cruel. He was not abusive. He did not drink, did not gamble, did not chase other women, did not raise his voice in anger. By the conventional measurements that most people use to judge a husband, he was, on paper, exemplary. He provided. He protected. He was faithful, in the physical sense, with an absoluteness that had never wavered. He wore his wedding ring every day. He spoke of his wife with pride in every public room he entered. He was, by every external standard, a good husband. And that is precisely what makes his failure so insidious. Because the damage that a good man causes through absence is invisible until it is catastrophic. He did not sleep that night. Not a single hour. He sat in that chair and watched the darkness outside the window slowly, reluctantly surrender to dawn. The sky moving through charcoal, and then ash, and then the pale, indifferent gray of a morning that had no interest in what had happened inside this house. The city woke up the way it always did. Traffic began its noise. Birds found their voice somewhere in the garden. The world outside continued turning with the breathtaking indifference the world always shows to private grief. And Damien Osei, billionaire, empire builder, Forbes Africa cover star, sat alone in the growing light and tried to locate himself inside the wreckage of the last 12 hours. By 7 in the morning, he had made his decision. He called his lawyer at 8. The divorce papers were drawn up within the week. He did not fight her on the settlement, not because he was generous in his grief, though perhaps he was, but because the negotiation of assets felt obscene against the scale of what had actually been lost. What was he going to do? Argue over square footage? Dispute the valuation of a Dubai property, while the marriage that had given it meaning lay in pieces on the floor? He signed what needed to be signed. He moved into a hotel, while the legal process did what legal processes do, slowly, mechanically, without feeling, which suited him, because feeling was the one thing he had absolutely no capacity for in those weeks. He went to the office. He took the meetings. He made the decisions. He performed the version of Damien Osei that the world needed to see. Composed, focused, unreachable, and then he returned every evening to a hotel suite that cost more per night than his father had earned in a month, and he sat with what he had lost. He had thought it would be anger. That was what he had expected to feel, the clean, hot, mobilizing fury of a man who had been betrayed. And the anger was there, yes. It came in waves, at unpredictable moments, in the middle of meetings, in the back of cars, at 3 in the morning when the silence of the hotel room became unbearable. But underneath the anger, deeper and colder and far more permanent, was something else entirely. Something that had no righteous edge to it, no one to direct it at, no story in which he was simply the wronged party and the world owed him sympathy. Underneath the anger was grief. And underneath the grief was the question that he could not stop returning to, that stalked him through every waking hour of those weeks with a persistence that no amount of work or distraction could shake. What if this was my fault? Not entirely. He was clear-eyed enough, even in the devastation, to understand that Serena had made choices. She had chosen silence over conversation, secret over confession, escape over the harder and more courageous work of forcing a crisis that might have saved them. She had chosen to let the distance grow rather than stand in the middle of it and demand that he cross it. Those were her choices. He did not erase them. But he was honest enough, and it cost him something to be this honest, to understand that she had made those choices inside a marriage where vulnerability had never been safe. Meanwhile, the internet had opinions. Of course it did. In the age where no private devastation remains private for long, word had gotten out the way word always gets out in circles of money and influence. Through the whisper networks of Accra and Lagos and London, through the mutual contacts and the industry events and the quiet, hungry gossip that moves through elite social circles like oxygen. Within a month of the filing becoming public record, the story had found its way online. He was definitely cheating. She didn't just leave a billionaire for no reason. A man that busy? Please. He had women in every city. She found out, and this was her revenge. They never had children. That tells you everything. Something was off from the beginning. She probably married him for the money and the lifestyle. These women always have an exit plan. No kids after 7 years? He knew. He always knew. His oldest friend who called from London and said, "Damien, get off the internet. I am begging you." But he read them anyway, the way a man probes a wound to confirm it still hurts. And what struck him? Sitting in that hotel suite reading strangers dissect his marriage with the casual confidence of people who knew nothing, the divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in November. His lawyer called at 9:15. He was in a board meeting. He stepped out, took the call, said, "Thank you," in the same tone he used to confirm flight times, and walked back into the meeting and closed a $40 million deal by midday. He did not tell anyone. He drove home, back to the house, which was his now, fully and only his, which somehow made it feel smaller, and he walked through every room in the early evening light. The sitting room where she had sat across from him and finally told him the truth. The kitchen where Grace moved quietly, pretending not to notice that his eyes were red. The staircase. The landing. The bedroom door, closed now, ordinary now, just a door. He stood in front of it for a long time. Then he turned around and walked back downstairs and sat in the chair where he had sat the night the world ended. And he let himself feel it. Fully. Finally. That night, I realized something that all the money in the world could not have taught me. You can build a billion-dollar empire and still lose the one person you thought you owned. And the most devastating part? You can't acquire what you should have given.